Thank you for taking the time. I definitely have wanted to pick your brain about a number of different things for quite some time now. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
No, I've been watching the show. I loved season one. I'm jazzed about season two. It's interesting because you bring two things that I really love together, which one is, of course, entrepreneurship. And there seems to always be this incredible entrepreneurial bend to everything you talk about, but also with culture and how it all kind of comes together. And I think for a long time, those were two different buckets. It was either you were sort of into culture and you were into design and you were into, I don't know, that stuff, or you were into like business and entrepreneurship. And I think one of the cool things that's happened in the last, I don't know, half decade or so is that everything's kind of just collided into one, which makes me really happy.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting because I think, what sort of the auspice for the show was me looking at all of these sort of creatives in the space that I was dealing with who loved making things and were then sort of intimidated or having a tough time navigating the commercial part of the
Totally.
enterprise, and having an opportunity to create this platform to talk to different successful creative entrepreneurs to at least show their blueprint and how they move through the space, I think has been really helpful for a lot of young people that you know again, they come into it with a creative impulse, a desire to make stuff, and a desire to be successful at that, but not knowing where to start in terms of actually, taking the left off of creativity and the right on commerce.
It's funny because when I was in high school, in ninth grade, I had this little DJ business, and I was 14 years old or 15 years old at the time. I think I was 14. I was a bit younger than most kids in my class, and I was an anomaly. I was weird. I wasn't like a cool kid. I was the entrepreneur, and I think in many ways, and I'll just sort of be vulnerable for a second. I was quite lonely. Like there wasn't other entrepreneurs. There wasn't other more people around me that were tinkering with business ideas and trying to calculate profit and loss statements and how to expand the business and do things like that. And actually, I think that's changed. I think if I was in high school today, that would be very, very different. In many ways, entrepreneurship has become far more accessible, and it's gone in some really cool ways. So, one of you've had a lot of incredible entrepreneurs and athletes and designers and creatives and artists on your show, but there's always kind of a bend to them that is also entrepreneurial. I just finished my morning coffee, and I was drinking out of a Big Face coffee mug, which is Jimmy Butler's coffee brand. We worked on with him on Shopify. Jimmy Butler, of course, is an incredible athlete, an incredible basketball player, but he's also an incredible entrepreneur. And I think long after his basketball career is over, that entrepreneurial business, that thing that he built, is still going to be there. Or, Marshawn Lynch in beast mode. And if you look at so many of these athletes, artists, creatives, many of them have been thrown into the arena of entrepreneurship, in some cases because they wanted to find a way to add a new component to their value, to their offering to their fans and their followers and their community. But the impact of it is profound because it means they have something very long lasting, far beyond their career in music or sports or whatever it might be. And I think that is incredible.
Totally. No, I mean, it's funny you say that about your sort of beginnings as a DJ. I too, so I grew up in Manhattan with a bunch of kids that were involved in hip hop, and there was the one friend who made beats, and then the one friend who was a DJ, and the one who was a rapper, and I just was not gifted in any of those disciplines. I had a little skill with fine art, but that was about the extent of it. But very quickly within our crew, it self-sorted that I became sort of the entrepreneur of the group because I loved the scene. I loved thinking about it. I loved thinking about the mechanics and the strategy and how, people got on and how things came together within music, but I couldn't make it. And most of my career has really been driven by that desire to sort of be in and around creatives and culture. And of course, expressing my creativity through curation, being able to read the marketplace, and then, to sort of identify audiences and what they want. But it does come from that sort of cultural point. And so, when I'm now pivoting back, it's like, I understand that, you can see certain people like a Jay-Z will have his Dame Dash. And that was at a point when he wanted to only be a rapper.
Right.
It was very convenient for him to have this other guy there. Eventually, 10 years into it, he has sort of soaked up all of the information and no longer needs that appendage to his operation. But I think there are a lot of young people in this business who sort of come at it from that angle.
Which is actually why, in many ways, you talk about Dame Dash and Jay-Z. I actually, when I look at some of the most successful business partnerships or partnerships in general, they're often not people that would have been friends in high school potentially. I mean, Toby and I have been on this journey together for, I don't know, a decade and a half now building Shopify. Toby is a coder. He's very much a product technologist. He's a software developer. I'm not. I'm a commercializer. I'm a storyteller. And I sometimes think back. He grew up in Germany. I grew up in South Florida. But I sort of think back, if we would have been friends in high school, I'm not sure we would have, because I was kind of doing my thing, he was doing his. But the partnership of bringing his skill set, which was to create this incredible piece of software, which, in my view, and those that use Shopify I think would agree with this, has sort of democratized entrepreneurship, made it easily or more easy to access a global marketplace and build a real business. And now I can take that software and I can make sure anyone that has an idea in the shower in the morning uses that software to build their own businesses. That idea of coupling that left brain and right brain, some people have both, and for them it's incredible. For others, and certainly I'm in this case, I sought out people that were just so different than I was. The business maxim of don't start companies with friends or start companies with family, I don't know if that's always true. I think there's always great exceptions there. But I do think, though, that some of the best partnerships are people that come to the problem from very, very different angles.
Definitely. I was going to say, I know you started your first business selling T-shirts, which I think is something that probably many people in my audience could empathize or look up to. I guess, speaking about sort of finding that partnership that, complements you, where did the sort of necessity for that sort of strike you in the process of building that original business that was all you?
So my first real business was a T-shirt business. The DJ thing was more of, I wanted to be a DJ when I was 13 years old. Nobody would hire me. I'm Jewish, and I went to a lot of bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and I always saw these DJs, and it wasn't really about the music for me on the DJs. It was that these people were up in their DJ booth, on the stage, and they were able to change the energy of a crowd like that, with music and their words. And you can take people that are all sitting down eating, rubber chicken at some, event space, and 5 minutes later, 3 minutes later, they're all doing the conga line. And I thought that was it was like magic to me. And I really wanted to participate in that magic, and no one would hire me. And my dad, he wasn't he's an entrepreneur, but he wasn't necessarily a very successful one. What he did was he gave me sort of what he would say chutzpah, or the audacity to say, like, why don't you just go do it yourself? And he never gave me money to start businesses with, but my dad would always, every time I had a crazy idea, he would validate that idea. And sometimes he would validate it by making me something simple, like he would make me a business card. He'd say, I made you a business card. It said Harley Finkelstein DJ. And that was that's all I needed. And so I throughout high school, I DJ'd like 500 parties over sort of high school and college, but 500 parties, private events. But that was really more to make a little bit of money while I was in school and scratch the itch that I wanted to be a DJ. When I moved...
name?
Pardon me? It was just Harley. Yeah, it wasn't very cool. Again, it was more about the business side of it and about the sort of the magic of changing the energy in the room than it was about sort of the creative music side. I moved from South Florida in 2001 to Montreal, to Canada, to go to McGill University. I was born in Montreal, so I wanted to go back there, and it was really cheap. So my parents didn't have much money, so it made a lot of sense to go there. And when I got there, things got really bad for our family. My dad was no longer around, and I needed to make some money for myself and support two much younger sisters. At McGill, a friend of mine was on student council, and he just randomly said to me, hey, student council at McGill University buys like 25 grand worth of T-shirts. The orientation shirts that say McGill University, Faculty of Arts or whatever. Montreal happens to have a very deep, rich apparel industry, whether it's Buffalo Jeans or American Apparel, big companies, Aldo, big companies in the clothing business were built there.
American Apparel
American Apparel was built in Montreal by Dov Charney, a Montreal entrepreneur.
Yeah, true. Yeah, there you go.
So I figured it out and figured out where to buy T-shirts from and how to screen print, and I just started making T-shirts for first McGill and then a bunch of other universities. And it was incredible. I mean, there was very little creativity involved. What was creative, however, was the pitch. The pitch was this. You are a student council treasurer. So you've been elected, you're 18 or 19 years old. You have to go and procure t-shirts for some class, some new class or some faculty. Instead of giving you a catalog to choose from, I'm going to create a much richer experience. I'm a student at the school, so it's basically I'm selling you t-shirts that I myself am going to be given. So let me bring in some friends of mine who are also students, and let's create mini fashion shows, and let's make the experience so much more rich and interesting, so that all things being equal, you're going to choose me, not Russell Athletics or some big t-shirt, promotional t-shirt business. At the time, Russell was the big one. And it worked. And by the end of college, we were selling t-shirts to, I don't know, like 40 universities around the country, around Canada. And that was really the first time that I recognized this thing called entrepreneurship is the greatest tool, in my view, the greatest tool on the planet for success, whatever your version of success is. Is it fame? Is it fortune? Is it celebrity? Is it power? Is it support from you, supporting myself and helping my sisters and my mom? Whatever that is, this tool called entrepreneurship is the greatest tool possible. And if you use it properly, you can build anything you want.
On every episode of Idea Generation, we ask people, what does money mean to you? And to me, the answer is abundantly clear. It has to be freedom. That's what it means to me. And when I think about entrepreneurship, that's sort of, having the ability to generate your own sort of virtuous cycle of commerce and revenue really frees you to, I think, be kind of your most pure self, if that makes any sense, as a creative.
Totally.
And even if that creativity is making, t-shirts for different colleges, because you're constantly just, doing little Rubik's cubes and,
that's right,
breaking down puzzles. And having that and feeling the ability to sort of will it to continue forward is incredibly satisfying.
Yeah. I mean, look, the reason I love the name of your show, Idea Generation, is that I think for a long time, anyone can generate ideas. Ideas are free. But for the first time, maybe ever, you can generate an idea and then you can execute on that idea. The barrier to entry into entrepreneurship is as low as it's ever been. As you know, because you wanted to start a show. You didn't have to go to, convince Netflix to put the show on. You didn't have to go to ABC to put the show on. You were able to do it yourself. So one, the entry into it is available to everyone, and the ceiling in terms of the success or the size or the growth of what you can do is unlimited. We have about 2 million stores on Shopify. We're about 10% of all e-commerce in the US. And we have some very big brands, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Unilever. We have Staples. We have, Mattel, American Girl, for example. We have really big brands, Heinz Ketchup. But the stories and the merchants that I talk most about are the Ben Francis at Gymshark, or the guys over at Allbirds, or Heather and Trina at Figs. These people that's had this idea, in the case of Heather and Trina, they had this idea that hospital scrubs don't look good. And they literally had lunch with a friend of theirs who was wearing hospital scrubs. And they took that friend and brought them to a hospital scrub store, bought the scrubs, fixed them so they looked better, and sent that friend on their way. So they had this idea, hey, maybe other people might want it. They then, because we live in the time that we live in right now, they were able to start a business around making much better fitting, much more comfortable, much better looking hospital scrubs. And a year and a half ago, they took the company public on the New York Stock Exchange. That was not possible 20 years ago.
No, absolutely not. There has been, on every level, from the creative side all the way to the commercial, so much friction has been taken out of the equation from when you and I were, in high school and in college, when, yes, starting a store was an almost insurmountable task. It needed startup capital, space, all kinds of different things. And to have tools like Shopify on that side, or, on the sort of creative side, whether it's Procreate and, Photoshop that you can have off a cloud on your computer, or Pro Tools or
YouTube, just a distribution place, right?
Well, yes, exactly. You have everything from the tools to make stuff to the distribution. all at your fingertips. It is a completely different and sort of decentralized, in the best way possible model.
Yeah.
I'm sort of curious, what is your, obviously, entrepreneurship is an incredibly nerve-wracking and anxiety-inducing experience. And, I often say that, like, I can wake up and get an email at 9 and feel like the sky is going to fall on me, and then get another email at noon and feel like I'm absolutely invincible. And then at 3, it can all come crashing down again. And then I see
Oh, you and me both, brother.
my question is, one, as someone that has, navigated a business from 20 or 30 employees to now several thousand, does that anxiety ever ebb?
No, it doesn't. There's many different types of entrepreneurs, but fundamentally there are two categories that I think a lot about in terms of entrepreneurship, business people, creators. There's those that want to go from 0 to 1, so start something from scratch and take it to a place where there is some traction. May not be a lot of traction, but there's something there. Then there's those that want to go from 1 to N, which is like take it, there's traction, and kind of scale it really, really big. And I think what I've tried to do is be versatile enough that I can do both. Even within Shopify, Shopify has now more than 10,000 people all over the world. I think more than 15 countries. We're a large publicly traded company. We're one of the largest companies in all of Canada. We're one of the largest technology companies on the planet. Our market cap, depending on the day you look at it, is many tens of billions of dollars. And what I've realized is the anxiety does not go away, to answer your question directly. However, what I've gotten better at is noticing when and how I can add real value to any circumstance. And sometimes the way that I add value is by saying, I need to bring in someone better, faster, smarter than me. This is not working. I'm not the right person for this particular thing. And when I look at the early days of Shopify, but also the growth of Shopify over the last, I just celebrated my Shopify, my 12th year at Shopify. So this is like my bar mitzvah year at Shopify, my 13th year at Shopify. The things that I'm most proud of are things that I've started from scratch, but also things that I've scaled. And I like doing both, but I've tried to become as self-aware as possible to know that is not for me. That concept of that is not for me. I have a great mentor. This isn't a name drop. He's truly someone who's important in my life, is Seth Godin. And Seth Godin tells this great story, one of my favorite stories that he tells, where he first went into Momofuku for the grand opening. And the waiter comes over to his table and says, "Hello, Mr. Godin, we're so happy to see you here." And Mr. Chang is very happy you're here. What would you like? And Seth says, "I'd like to order the Brussels sprouts." And he says, "But I don't want the bacon." He doesn't eat bacon. And so the waiter says, "I'm sorry, it's only served with the bacon." And the waiter says, they go back and forth, and Seth says to the waiter, "Look, I don't eat bacon. It's cheaper if you don't have the bacon. Please don't serve it." And he says, "I'm sorry, we can't." Anyways, in the end, David Chang comes out of the kitchen and says, "Hey, Seth, so glad you're here. This is how we serve it. And maybe this restaurant is not for you." And that was when Seth would tell it, he would say that that's when he knew David Chang would be a huge success, because he had a deep understanding of who this was for and who this wasn't for. And I've thought about that story in a more personal way for me, like sort of internalizing that, like figuring out what is for me and what isn't for me is really, really important. And that ability to navigate those, that's a really cool thing. I'm sure there's someone better, but how do I continue to add value here? I wasn't good at that even 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, I was a hammer and everything looked like a nail to me. And so just like go around hammering things like with my, but some things don't need a hammer. Some things need a screwdriver or an Allen key or something different. And that is where I think, for me at least, great mentorship, great coaching, honestly, just growing up a little bit in my late 30s now, like a little bit of self-reflection. I'm on my way. I'm not there yet. I'm on my way on this journey of understanding real self-awareness and picking what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And being okay with saying, that's not for me. I don't think I can add value in the way that Shopify or Shopify's merchants or anything, the final recipient of the product deserves.
One of the things I found really interesting, I was listening to your Tim Ferriss interview, and you talked about essentially having to reapply for your role and all of your executives reapplying for their roles every year because the business was scaling so quickly. I think, as someone that has worked, when I worked at Complex, and we went from a team of 9 to a team of 400, which is obviously modest relative to what you guys have done.
No,
but
it's an amazing thing. No matter what size it is, like 9 to 400 is insane, and complex is just iconic. We all look up to them.
Thank you. It was fun and challenging and stressful the whole time. But I'm curious, what does that actually look like, and how do you implement that across, all the sectors of the business?
The idea of requalification on an annual basis is there's something called the law of ecology. I think it's called this. I think it's the fourth law or third law of ecology. I'm sure some listeners are going to look this up and correct me. But the law of ecology is that for a species to survive, that species needs to grow equal to or faster than the environment around them. And so if you were at a place, a company, I went to law school and I practiced law for all of 10 months. So I'll use a law firm example. At a law firm, you see these 30-year partners, meaning they've been there for 30 years. And their practice really hasn't changed because for the most part, the law hasn't really changed. And so they really haven't had to innovate very much or change or requalify because they have their book of business. They know how to execute on the problems that book of business is going to bring to the table. And effectively, they just if they just keep tweaking things a little bit, getting marginally better, it's going to be sufficient. In fact, if they don't even get marginally better at all, it's also may be sufficient because again, whether it's tax law or it's corporate commercial law, litigation, it evolves, especially if you're in a common law jurisdiction, which is precedent based, not civil law, which is based on a book of rules. You can pretty much get away with continuing the status quo with slight variations, slight improvements. That is not the case at a place like Complex. It's not the case at a place like Shopify. It's not the way things are done at a high growth company. And so in order for the species, in this case, the leaders to survive and to continue to grow at the company, they have to grow faster than Shopify. Shopify is growing at this incredible pace. I mean, 7 years ago, we went public. We had one product really. I mean, we had Shopify, e-commerce. We had a little bit of point of sale, but really that was it. Today we have a capital business that's given out almost $4 billion of cash advances. We have a payments business. We have a shipping and logistics business. We have something called Shopify Balance, which is our take on business banking. We have audiences, which is our take on increasing return on ad spend, like an advertising product. It's so much more complex. So because everything is changing so much, what we ask, and I think what we demand of the people leading the company is you have to grow as fast as the company's growing, and if not faster. And the only way to do that is to find some way to requalify. And the way you requalify is, are you going deep on things? I mean, I think there's this crazy thing in the business community around the fight against micromanagement, that micromanagement is really bad. And we completely disagree with that at Shopify. We actually think you need to be high level and set the strategy and set the tone and set the culture as a leader. But sometimes you need to get into the weeds. Sometimes you have to get into the details. And that means that there are times where I'm in before an earnings release or before a product release, I'm in the press release, Google Doc, and I'm changing words around, and I'm shortening things and lengthening things or adding more color to things. In other ways, it's right before I'm about to, we're doing Shopify editions, we're about to announce something. Someone goes in, very senior leader, maybe Toby even, and says, I want to describe this product a little bit differently. And I think that is really important. And so the requalification, there is no barometer. We don't say to requalify you have to do X, Y, and Z, but it's far more of a cultural thing that we look around and say, does it feel like everyone around us is requalification, or do we see anyone stagnating? And we see them stagnating. That's when we have a conversation and say, look, what got you here is not going to get you where you want to go. And that's okay. Maybe you don't want to go to that next place. Yeah. And then, people talk about the right time to join a company. Not enough people talk about the right time to leave a company. And there is a right time to leave where you've done your work, you feel grateful for being there. The company feels grateful for having you, and you say, I'm going to move on to something new now.
That makes a ton of sense. And yes, having been on both sides of that equation, there are times where you feel like, all right, I've done everything that can be done here, and now it's time for me.
That's right. And now I want to go on. There's I find there's a Wikipedia article on this topic, but I found it always fascinating that there was this people that Bell, the company, used to be referred to as Ma Bell, and partially it was referred to as Ma Bell, like Mother Bell, because if you go back before the breakup, which I think happened, antitrust breakup happened in the early 80s, where they broke up Bell and it became like Bell South and AT&T and all these things sort of came out of it. Ironically, a lot of them ended up getting back together and merging, but in the early 80s, it was broken up. And so I was fascinated by why they call it Ma Bell. And so they call it because it had so many different areas and basically owned telecommunications in the Western world, but also because there were so many people that worked there for their entire life. And they began to depend on Bell almost like in a maternal way, that like, I am a lifer at Bell. I want the gold watch at 25 years. I want the big pension at 50 years. If you go back generations, just two generations ago, the idea of staying somewhere for a very, very long period of time was admirable. You wanted to do that. And I think today there is far more intentionality about where we work and how we spend our time. And partially it's because we have more options, but that people are searching for their life's work during their actual career instead of looking for their life's work, which I think our grandparents did, after they retired. If they were lucky enough to retire, they would then go and do what they really wanted to do, whether it was art or something creative, or it was travel or photography or philanthropy. But now people want to do that during their actual career and not wait for their exit to go and do the thing they truly love.
I was going to say that sort of raises a question. Something that I think about a lot is, obviously you guys are the entrepreneurship company, and sort of general mores and attitudes towards entrepreneurship, wax and wane, depending upon the generation. I think, from my side, I came up out of the world of hip hop, where there was an incredible premium put on entrepreneurship. And I think that sort of extended broadly across the culture during a lot of what I would say was our sort of formative years. And I think when I see Gen Z, I see that they have a sort of different and wholly unique relationship to entrepreneurship. And I'm curious, sort of what do you see, and how do you see that changing the businesses that are formed, the products that are made, all of that?
Do you remember the posters you had up in your wall when you were a kid? What were they?
I had every rap magazine from 1993 to 1996 dissected, cut up, and put up piece by piece into a giant collage everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say, but I had something similar, not nearly as cool. Like, you probably had Biggie and I probably had Vanilla Ice or something. But that's who we admired. I mean, how many of your friends had the Michael Jordan, wingspan,
yeah.
Right? It was everywhere. Every second friend's house I went to, they had the wingspan photo in there. We had athletes, we had celebrities, we had musicians on our walls when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s. I don't know if that happens as much. At least, I have some friends with children that are the kids that are in their teenage years. They're not really, posters are not really the same thing anymore because most things are digital. But my expectation is that if they were to put posters up, or they would look at people they admire, it would be people that are entrepreneurs. It would be people like, Kylie Jenner gets heat on for a bunch of different reasons, but like fundamentally, I had a sort of a front row seat to her building a bunch of her companies with her mom and her family. She's an incredible entrepreneur. She is she had a platform in which to distribute her message and her brand, but she's an incredible entrepreneur. The fact that the Gen Z or people right now are looking up to their role models today are athletes and musicians, but they're also entrepreneurs, I think is really cool. I mean, the fact that people still have posters of Jobs on their wall. Steve Jobs, I think, is really interesting. So fundamentally, I think that the Gen Z, whatever we want to call that, one, they admire entrepreneurship in a very different way. Two, they have a healthy distrust of conventional wisdom. Go to university, get a degree, become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant. They don't want to do that. Maybe some of them do, but some of them just want to actually find their thing, and they want to be Ronnie from Kith, or they want to be Pharrell, but they want to be Pharrell for his entrepreneurial angle, not necessarily from his his music angle. That is one thing that's really cool. The second thing is they have a much healthier relationship with what we would call and our parents would call failure, which they would just say, no, I tried something, it didn't work. I did this video, I put it on TikTok, didn't get the reception I wanted. Now I'm going to try to do it on Snap, or now I'm going to try to create a YouTube channel, or now I'm going to try to do something different. So the relationship is different. But just to talk about the numbers, okay, in 2021, more than 5.4 million applications for new businesses were filed in the US. That's according to the US Census Bureau. That is 23% more than 2020. And that is twice double the amount that it was a decade ago. So you have this burst of entrepreneurial activity, and it is reversing a decade-long slump. In fact, this has been the last 2 years has been the largest entrepreneurial boom in like 50 years. And if you sort of go one step deeper, if you look at something like Y Combinator, the famous Silicon Valley accelerator, between 2019, so before the pandemic, and 2021, applications for Y Combinator increased by 35%.
Wow.
So there are more people trying their hand at businesses. There are more people that are trying their hand at startups and technology companies. And then even if you look at the business schools, there was an incredible article that Wharton MBA students choose one of 18 concentrations at the school. And over the past 5 years, the percentage of those choosing entrepreneurship has increased by 30%. So they're given 18 concentrations they can go into, all types of hedge fund, finance, anything they want, and more than 30%, an increase of 30% is choosing entrepreneurship. And I think part of it is that they want more flexibility. A lot of people are disenchanted with office life, and the end result is this massive boom. So I think that there is a huge difference between those that are starting businesses today in their 20s and 30s versus what it was 10 or 20 years ago, or 10 or 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. And the best example I can give you is that my wife and I have two children. We have two daughters. Zoe is 3 and Bailey's 6. Our wishes for them, our hope for them is for them to find something that they love doing. I love my parents. My parents were incredibly supportive, but my parents' hope for me and my grandparents' hope for me, being sort of Holocaust survivors, new immigrants to Canada, was to have a stable job, to have some financial stability, not to have some sort of creative outlet or some sort of creative leverage or some sort of, joy in the work that I do in the way that you and I have this joy. That just wasn't the case for them. And I think when you put all these things together, the new generation of entrepreneurs that are starting now in their late teens and early 20s and late 20s, this is the golden age of entrepreneurship, and they're going to be the ones leading this thing.
No, it's very interesting you say that. I do feel like the boom in entrepreneurship is a sort of unexpected byproduct of the pandemic, which I think no one would have predicted in March of 2020.
Definitely not.
Everyone that we've talked to a number of people for season 2 who are in the sort of streetwear and apparel space, and they've all talked, and I've of course asked them about the pandemic, and they're like, yeah, everyone was like battening down the hatches. We thought it was going to be over, and then we had our best year in 5 years or something like that. And I do think that created a very fertile ground. And you look at obviously last year with the Great Resignation, hundreds of thousands of people quitting their jobs. Sort of inexplicably, it seems clear to me that there is a desire for them to sort of steer their own ship. And I'm sure that a not insignificant number of those people have gone on to start their own businesses as a result of sort of that fertile ground and opportunity.
And also, we just have to say this out loud: the cost of failure. I mean, I'm reading this great book. It may not resonate the same with some of your readers, some of your listeners who are in the U.S., but the greatest entrepreneurship family in all of Canada is the Bronfman family. And so Charles Bronfman wrote a book called Distilled. His father was Sam Bronfman. He was a bootlegger originally, but then built Seagram's. And the Bronfman family, they're incredible people. And I'm reading this book by Charles. And Charles talks about every time they started in the early days of Seagram's and the Bronfman family, this is in like the 40s and 50s, every time they went into a new business, a new division, they created Crown Royal after the Queen and the Queen came to Canada for a visit. They created Crown Royal, which became iconic. Every time they did something new, the risk wasn't that it wasn't going to work and they'd have to shift resources. The risk was it would take down the entire company and the entire family and all their, they would lose their house. That was the risk. That was the cost of failure 70 years ago. I would even say that's the cost of failure 30 years ago. You try something, it doesn't work. You took a loan out from the bank to do it because it was expensive, and now you're in trouble. Whereas today, you can try two or three different things, and the one that works, you end up scaling. I mean, that I think is modern entrepreneurship, and it's done in a way where, yes, there is more competition because there's more people that you're competing with because more people can participate, but it also means that if it doesn't work, you can just try something else. And that I think is a wonderful, it's not a safety net. A safety net gives it too much, makes it too comfortable. It's still very scary. Entrepreneurship, business creation is a very difficult thing. Most businesses still fail, even with that. But the cost of that failure is not that you're going to be wiped out or that you're going to jeopardize your entire family. It's that you may need to try something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I don't know if I would describe my father as a failed entrepreneur, because I feel like he's been very successful in many things, but running his own business was not a success.
Yeah.
In the early 90s, he was a video game developer. Okay. And the recession of 91 was crushing to his business. But I think about that and the stakes of what that meant for the family versus obviously what I'm doing. And while in certain regards, what I'm doing is on a sort of more public and more expensive level, just the level of investment to get idea generation off the ground. But to your point, because of all of the things that have taken the friction out of it, it is not, I don't walk that tightrope that this is going to affect my children's ability to go to college or whatever it is. And that is very much freeing. And, as the son of a failed entrepreneur, I am obviously very paranoid about those kinds of things, spend an inordinate amount of time looking at different parts of the business, thinking about that, because, I've seen that can be create very challenging situations. But again, I don't get that same sense that it's like that anymore.
I agree with you. I actually think I'm the same way. I'm still incredibly paranoid. I still worry about, is my family going to have enough? Which is not always reason. It doesn't always make sense. At the beginning of our discussion here today, you said, does that anxiety go away? And it doesn't. I'm trying to do is sharpen that anxiety to make it really, really productive. So create some tools that when I feel, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now. What am I anxious about? Like, what has happened? What is this feeling? How do I, because of my upbringing, and it sounds like you have a similar one a little bit, I always try to turn every lemon I get into lemonade. And the problem with turning lemons into lemonade, meaning like something bad happens, I'm like, well, push it aside. Let's be an optimist about it. Cause I am a card carrying optimist, 100%. But by sitting with the anxiety just a little bit longer, what I'm now able to sort of think about is, okay, if I'm really worried about this thing, what can I do to make sure I'm not worried about it again? Does that mean reviewing the numbers again? Does that mean looking at that business, part of our business again? There is a way to hone that anxiety, to hone that stress in some cases, to make it more eustress as opposed to de-stress. And the eustress is very productive. It can be very valuable. The de-stress is where it becomes paralyzing. And so I think all of us try to run away from the anxiety, run away from the stress. And after lots of coaching and really great therapy and having an incredible partner in my life with my wife, Lindsay, I've been able now to try to hone these things a little bit better. But the truth is, it doesn't go away. And I think I wanted it to go away. I thought at some point, when Shopify is this big or I'm doing this stuff, it's going to go. And it doesn't. And maybe it shouldn't. Maybe actually that's part of the DNA of being a good entrepreneur, is to have that little bit of anxiety from time to time, or maybe it happens more than time to time, that you can actually direct into the most effective place to get a return on that anxiety. Like ROA, I guess, return on anxiety. It's a kind of a weird term.
I was going to say, you've mentioned having this mentorship and having sort of CEO coaches and that kind of thing. Was there a moment or catalyst that made you feel like, all right, I need to pursue this? And then also, as someone who has considered this and not yet ever found a CEO or, president coach, executive coach, what would you say are the most valuable things that have come out of it for you?
I was really lucky to encounter coaching early on in my sort of career at Shopify. There was this video, anyone can look it up. If you just type in Eric Schmidt coaching, there's a 30-second clip of Eric Schmidt, who at the time I think he just became the CEO of Google, or he'd been there for a year or so. But it was an interview on television where someone says, you have a coach, you talk about coaching Eric, like, why do you're Eric Schmidt, you ran Sun, now you're running Google. Why do you need a coach? And Eric Schmidt basically said, everybody needs a coach. And that was incredibly valuable to me because it was just a good reminder that, like, okay, like Eric Schmidt, who, is one of the great leaders, business leaders of our time, if he has a coach, I probably need one too. I'm nowhere near the level of experience or the level of thoughtfulness and execution as he is. And so I began seeing a coach, I don't know, pretty much 12 years ago when I started at Shopify. And I've sort of swapped coaches over time depending on the stage of the business, because some coaches are really, really good at, like, focusing on Harley as a leader. And other coaches are really good at focusing on running a large company at scale. And other coaches are really good at, like, one of the coaches I had a particular expertise in international expansion. And that was very important for that particular period of my life. So I've always looked at these coaches as having, again, using the tool belt analogy, different tools in my tool belt. And one of the first questions I ask when I meet new, really interesting people, I ask them, hey, do you have a coach? And most of them say yes. And I say, great, who's your coach? And tell me about the coach. And if I'm compelled to, if it's interesting, I'll say, can I have an intro? I only try to see one coach at a time because I don't have that much time to commit to it and I want to take it seriously. But I pretty much have had a coach throughout like my entire career at Shopify. On the mentorship side, that's that's something that I've been really fortunate to have since the early days, like since I was like 15 years old. I would call these people that I thought were interesting and were far more successful than I was, and say, can I spend some time with you? And I've sort of translated that into having a bit of a personal board of directors today. And there's, let's say 5 people on that board of directors, and every year or two I swap one out for somebody else. When I had our first child, Bailey, there was someone who I knew sort of on the periphery, was sort of a friend of a friend, who just every time I saw him, the engagement and the mindfulness that he gave his children was just incredible. It was like nothing else existed. He was full on dad mode, and he's a very successful entrepreneur. And so I wanted to understand how he was able to actually do that. And so I brought him closer to my life, and I brought someone that, wasn't necessarily that I feel like I got, I was getting diminishing marginal returns from an advice perspective. I said, look, let's tone down our cadence, because like this has been amazing and I'm so grateful, but right now, I'm going to try to spend time with somebody else. That idea of having a personal board of directors, whether you're the president of Shopify or the founder of Idea Generation, you can do that if you're like, I did that when I was in high school. And in high school, I had to send a lot more of those, signals and phone calls and emails, or it wasn't email there, but, a lot more phone calls to say, will you meet with me? And most people said no. But often, randomly, they would say yes. And it's often because they themselves had someone in their life when they were at your stage who was really helpful to them, and they want to pay it forward. And that idea of creating that board of the personal board of directors that isn't necessarily connected to your business, but really is connected to you as an entire person. So Harley as the president of Shopify, but also Harley as father and husband and friend and entrepreneur, because I have some other stuff that I do on the side, on the entrepreneurial side, which I do because I love starting companies. That has been one of the greatest advantages I have, I think, over most people. And it's free, and most people can do it, and they don't. And I cherish my time with those mentors, and I don't think I'd be here without them.
I agree. I have also been very fortunate in my career. Although I have not had coaching, I have had a number of mentors who have really pulled me along the way and showed me quite a bit. And I wouldn't say that it created shortcuts necessarily, but it helped me see the whole playing field at a time when I did not have that sort of vantage. You mentioned starting a few businesses, and I know that you started the tea company during the pandemic to kind of like test yourself, see what the marketplace was like, see if you still had it. How has that experiment been, and how has that changed your thinking as it applies to Shopify?
Oh man, so at the beginning of the pandemic, March 2020, Shopify went fully remote, which we still are. We're digital by design, so we spend time together in person, but there is no Shopify HQ anymore. And I was finding myself drinking a ton of coffee, way more coffee than ever before. And, on the back to sort of the anxiety topic a little bit, I was finding particularly in the afternoon, I was getting quite jittery. One of my closest friends is David Siegel, who's famously the founder of David's Tea, which is a company he started, and they had like 200 or 300 stores around U.S. and Canada. Took it public for, I think, a couple $100 million, and be a super successful tea entrepreneur. And he's like, you should try some tea. I know, like I told him I was getting jittery. And he said, I'm not into tea, like not my thing. I get that in gift baskets, like every now and then after I give a talk, they send me a gift basket with a bunch of random stuff. There's always tea in there. And he's like, no. He's like, let me curate the best tea. And he did. He started bringing over different tea. A lot of it was green tea, some matcha, but it was like super, like incredibly curated high-end tea. And he taught me how to use it, and he sort of started tinkering with accessories for me. Like I told him I travel a lot. He's like, all right, I'm gonna make you the best travel mug ever, and like literally with duct tape and like adding filters inside on his own. Like he set me up with this incredible tea kit, and so I loved it. I felt that whereas caffeine in coffee was giving me this like jolt. Tea gave me this calm alertness in the afternoon, and I was sleeping better. It was awesome. At the same time, it felt like starting a business in 2020 during the pandemic was so unique, was so different than anything else that I had experienced in my life, that I was curious to see what it would be like to start a business right then and there, and put myself in the shoes of the millions of stores on Shopify. And so David and I, nights and weekends, would just started tinkering on this idea. We called it Fire Belly Tea. And we ended up launching about 8 months ago or so. And it's this labor of love. And it's just, David goes and curates the best teas, the teas you can't get anywhere. And he went and found a great designer and designed the tea accessories that he always wanted to design himself, but never had the opportunity to do so because at some point, David's Tea was so big that he wasn't able to go and do hacky stuff like that. And from a business perspective, when I started we didn't talk about this, but before going to Shopify, I was one of the first Shopify merchants. I sort of transitioned from the t-shirt business selling to schools, universities, to selling t-shirts direct to consumer. It was called Smoofer, and it was this licensed t-shirt business that I had, and I was one of the first stores on Shopify. That's how I met Toby and how I met Shopify. And at that point, you spent money on two things: inventory and advertising, and particularly Google AdWords. And so you would have to sort of find these arbitrage opportunities. If I had a Batman licensed t-shirt, I would look for cities that had movie theaters but didn't have shopping malls. And I would target that geography with and buy the keyword for Batman, which, in like North Bay, Ontario wasn't very expensive. But it was all about sort of, algorithms and buying more ads and having a lot of cash so you can buy more ads with. And that was difficult for me because I didn't have very much money. Whereas today, starting a business, we are far more focused on the brand and the story of each tea and why certain teas affect you certain ways, and educating people on steeping times and water temperatures, which makes a huge difference when you're using really high end, when you're making really high end tea. And it's been this great labor of love, but it also has brought me much closer to what it's like to start a business right now. And I'm in the Shopify admin, many times a week now. When we add a new feature, like something like, fulfillment, Shopify logistics, I try to use it myself and give the team feedback and say, here's what's cool, here's what's not cool. But putting myself really into the arena of what our merchants are going through has been incredible. And starting something from scratch has been so much fun. So that's been really, really cool for me.
That's awesome. You mentioned briefly that Shopify has gone completely remote in its. Now, I'm curious how you feel like that's changed the dynamic, both from a process standpoint, but also from a culture standpoint. Because I have a team of about 6 or 7 people, and we obviously business was born during the pandemic, so it's always been remote, and I think all of us find it challenging in certain ways. Yeah. Obviously, the flexibility is great, but it's
not free. The flexibility is not free. So the term that I use more than the phrase that I use more than anything else, talking about our current model, is that office centricity is over. Meaning, the office was the central meeting point for Shopify for the last decade and a half. That is no longer the case. It is not work from home though. It is work from anywhere. There is spaces that you can go and meet your team, and we actually encourage people to spend more time meeting their team in person, whether it's, at a co-working space or at one of our, we call ports, which are, we sort of turn our offices into these spaces where people can gather. It's sort of, they're set up and designed and architected well to be meeting spots for teams. But you can also work from a cafe. And if you so happen to want to, live somewhere else for a couple of months with your family and you're able to do so, you should go do that as well. But it's not work from home. And I think that's the major thing. So the first thing is, like, you need to find the space where you can do your best work. And before, it had to be the office, and now it can be anywhere. So that gives you great flexibility. But you also have to ensure that people are spending time face to face. So, when you are working on something really, really difficult, let's say you're releasing a new product, a couple days before that, leading up to that product release, like making sure the team is together, maybe to do the launch together in person, wherever that might be, that really is important also. So I think that, like, people assume that this sort of new version of working where, we don't go to offices anymore, we're all sitting in our basements by ourselves 100% of the time. That is not true. I think that's a bad version of it. I think, and I also think hybrid is also kind of a strange, maybe not a bad version, but a strange version, which is like sometimes in the office, sometimes I'm at home. I don't really know where everyone is. I like to think what we're trying to do is a little bit more intentional, which is like, okay, the idea is work from anywhere you want, but every month or every 2 months, let's make sure there are 3 days where our team is spending time together. And let's figure out a location that works really well for us to be together. And the jury's still out long-term on what exactly this is, but we are trying to, as we get more information, more input, and more insight from what's working, what's not, make really good changes. The other benefit is Shopify historically has been a Canadian-based company. I mean, I'm talking to you right now from my home here in Ottawa. That's where we were. So if you wanted to come and work at Shopify 8 years ago, 5 years ago, you had to move to Canada. You had to move to Ottawa for the most part. That's no longer the case. Our ability now, like the total addressable market for people that work at Shopify is the world. There is no longer this need to like, hey, here's your offer, here's your title, here's your responsibilities, here's your compensation, and here's this asterisk that says you must move to Canada. That asterisk is gone now. And so we've been able to hire incredible people from all over the world. Our new general counsel is in DC, our new CTO is in San Francisco, our CFO is in New York City. People are free to live wherever it's best for them and still be able to participate and still help us grow the business. And that's, I think that's a better model.
That makes a ton of sense. How do you approach issues around culture and building that sort of connectivity, given people being everywhere?
Communication matters a great deal. So, we town halls are not a nice to have, they're a must have. The way we communicate, we use Slack internally, is different. We try to over communicate as much as we possibly can, but not to the extent that it distracts people. We try different things. I mean, I mentioned this idea of a burst. A burst is basically a time where everyone on the team gets together somewhere, and they're not there checking email, like staring at their laptops. They're there staring at each other and trying to engage with each other and trying to get to know each other. So that becomes really important. But culture is not, we used to have, great offices with beautiful art and great light and great food and like amazing. We also have lunch together. But that's not culture. Those are just, those were in-office perks when those were important. Culture is how people feel about being there. Culture is what people do when no one is watching. And I think what the greatest catalyst to having a great culture is like the mission. And for us, the mission is clear. You come to Shopify if you believe that entrepreneurship is important and more people should participate in it. And we are going to try to make that a lot easier. You mentioned earlier on, like, we are the entrepreneurship company. I'd like to think we are. I don't think we're there yet. There is no entrepreneurship company. I think Shopify has the best shot at becoming an entrepreneurship company. But while we say that, the vast majority of the world still does not want to, or doesn't know how to, or believes that it's too expensive or too complicated to participate in entrepreneurship. And we want to make it more accessible. So if you want that, Shopify is the best place, we think, for you to do that with. It's the best vehicle. And so making sure people are aligned in the culture and people understand what's happening in the company through town halls and through way more written communication and through asynchronous video, where there's something that I want one particular team to really understand. I'll hit record on my QuickTime here, sitting on my desk in my home, and I'll say, hey, give me 30 seconds of your time. There's something important I want you to listen to. And I'll invite you all to direct message me, or I'll be on this Zoom later on. You can all come and we can do, an AMA and ask me anything, or we can do a town hall or some sort of round table. So over communication matters way more in this model.
I'm also curious, between you and Toby, as you have created a very, I think, clear and distinct corporate culture that I experience with all the people on your team that I have interfaced with. And I'm curious how much of it has come out of conversations and been directly articulated by you, and how much of it do you think is just trickle down from how you guys present and how you guys sort of, interact with your team members?
I mean, some of it is just organic, right? I don't write code, and Toby's like one of the greatest programmers on the planet, so he should probably be focused on that stuff.
Yes.
But I love telling stories, and I'm far more verbose, and so it makes sense for me to be out there telling the Shopify story, whether it's on to investors on Wall Street, or it's on CNBC, or it's telling the story through these great mediums like podcasts with great on amazing shows like yours. But I think a lot of companies, one of the things they do, and I think this is wrong, is they look at their group of leaders, whether it's executive teams or any group of leaders at the company, and they say, here are your list of strengths and here are your list of weaknesses. And we are going to attempt to mitigate your weaknesses here. And we just don't do that at Shopify. I mean, you've met some people that run brand, for example, like Lindsay, who's like, just incredibly next level brilliant and truly one of the greatest people I've ever worked with in my life. Lindsay's really good at these things, and I just want her to get better at the things she's good at. I want her to sharpen her strengths, and I will help her find ways to mitigate weaknesses by hiring people around her that can help with that, or by finding new processes or to automate some of those things that she may not be as good at. Because I believe Lindsay, just to pick on her, she's going to laugh when she listens to this, but I believe her strengths are so strong that if I can help her get those to be even sharper, she will be best in the world at what she does. And all the stuff that she's not necessarily good at, all the stuff that she would admit are her weaknesses, we can find ways to mitigate those that don't distract her from sharpening her strengths. And that is what we've always done at Shopify. I could learn how to program. I'm not sure I'm ever going to be as good as Toby. So instead, let me be the best at storytelling and let Toby become the best at product and technology, because we both, I think we both feel like we can get there. We're not there yet, but we feel we can get better and better. And that idea of it's sort of like if you take a sharp stone and you put it in water in the river, over 1,000 years, it becomes a river stone. It's nice and shiny and smooth. We don't want river stones. We want spiky objects. And I think most big companies, what they end up doing to their leaders, they end up creating river stones that are nice and smooth and well-rounded. And we're not well-rounded, and that's okay.
I mean, yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. There is sort of a certain homogenization that happens across companies over time as they become sort of legacy institutions.
Big time.
And it's tough to avoid that and keep that sort of scrappy entrepreneur, the entrepreneurial instinct as you scale to, hundreds of employees, or in your case, tens of thousands of employees.
Yeah.
I have a question. You, early in your career, stepped away from entrepreneurship for a small time to become a lawyer. Now, I've seen in interviews where you talk about how that you pursued that in order to be a better entrepreneur. And I was just sort of curious, how exactly did you see that connection between law and being better at entrepreneurship?
My philosophy around school was always a little bit different, I think. Maybe it's more common today, but certainly different at the time, which was I felt like my tuition was me buying something from the school, and therefore the school owed me a debt. And the repayment of that debt from the school, from the university, from the college, whatever it was skills. And if they weren't able to give me skills, it was like, that was a bad use of my money and bad use of my time. When I was in college, I'd met a mentor of mine who was sort of part of that, group of personal board of directors, took a liking to me and began to understand my t-shirt business, my licensed t-shirt business, and my collegiate t-shirt business, and just kind of liked me a lot. And that mentor had sort of very casually hinted that, law school could be incredibly valuable not become a lawyer, but become a better entrepreneur. So for example, I told him that I'm good at writing, but I'm not great at writing. And I thought I probably need to sharpen my writing skills. I went to one of the best public high schools in America in South Florida. I didn't learn how to write very well. McGill University is one of the greatest colleges in the world. I still did not learn how to write very well. It was only in law school that I was able to really to sharpen my skills around writing. And that was really valuable for me. The amount of reading that you have to do in law school, like they're like, hey, read this book. It's like 1,000 pages and come in a week from now and tell us the 3 most important lines. I was like, wow, that's like, that's a needle in a haystack, like, on steroids. That's a very difficult task. Or moot court, which is basically debate, except it's in a court setting. So it's basically like you're litigating against someone else. That idea of like critical reasoning and critical debate. And like, here's your argument. Let me tell you why, judge, let me tell you why that person's argument is bad. That was incredible. But as a law student, I didn't make a lot of friends. Most of my classmates thought I was distracted. Most of my classmates did not think I was serious about school. And it was mostly because they were going to these big interviews with these big white shoe law firms and they were trying to get straight A's and I wasn't. I was trying to I think my law school tuition was $15,000 a year, which is far less than it would be in the US, but it was in Canada. And I felt like the law school owed me $15,000 plus my time worth of knowledge and skill. And I did a joint law MBA. So I did 3 years of law school and then one year of MBA. And I think I got a lot of value from law school. I'm not sure I got the same amount of value during my MBA. And so if I were to leave a Yelp review or some sort of review on the website for law school and business school, I would probably give the law school 4 out of 4 stars or something, and I'd probably give the business school 2 out of 4 stars because I didn't think the exchange of value was fair. I gave the MBA school a lot, and it didn't give me as much as I wanted. Now, if I were doing the MBA, going to business school to get a job at some big, accounting firm or some big consulting firm or some big Wall Street bank, and it got me the job, I probably would have felt more, validated that, yeah, that money that I gave the law school, well, it got me a great job after law school or business school, would have got me a great job after business school. But that's how I looked at it. And I think most people, look at, a lot of people now are saying there's sort of this general philosophy that, education, higher education may not be as important. Everything I can learn there, I can learn on YouTube. That's true. And if you can do that's amazing. But I do think also a different way to look at school, even high school to some extent, is I'm spending my time on this thing. I could, if I'm in 10th or 11th or 12th grade, I could go and work somewhere. I can go work at a store, I could work at a retail shop, I can start a business. If I'm going to actually finish high school, if I'm actually going to go to college, there needs to be a fair exchange of goods here and a fair exchange of value. And I felt law school gave me that. I did not feel like business school did nearly as much. And I remember just pre-IPO, so we took the company public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2000 and Toronto Stock Exchange, but the New York one was obviously the big one. In 2015, it was really cool. I got a chance to ring the bell with my team, and it was just an incredible experience as an entrepreneur. But a lot of the things that I think I borrowed in up until that point, and certainly after taking the company public, those were skills that I at least began to sharpen when I was in law school, and I'm grateful that I did that.
That makes a lot of sense to me. On a micro level, when I was an undergrad at NYU, I did drop out, but I was already writing for a number of different rap magazines.
Awesome.
And
of course you were.
Everyone expected that I would be a journalism major.
Yeah.
And instead I was a history major because I felt like if I'm already being paid to do this part of it, I think I can sort of figure that part out.
Yeah.
History is going to have so much more value to me. And it was the writing, and it was also the contextual knowledge that I was then able to apply to all of the things that I would think about.
For sure. History is fundamentally storytelling, and you are fundamentally, you're one of the best storytellers. And so you have to acknowledge the fact that played a big role there. But, most people, if you want to make films, you should probably go to film school because there's some technical aspects to it. But in that case, it's a fair exchange of value. I want to become a filmmaker, I should go to film school. But if I want to be a writer, I should figure out how am I going to, what program, what course of study is going to allow me to become a better writer, to tell better stories. And I think you did the same thing with history than I did with law school.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk about, obviously we are living through very unprecedented times economically. I look at the market every day. I look at all of the financial news. It is hard to make heads or tails of where exactly things are going. And I'm curious, what do you think a aspiring entrepreneur needs to consider, given sort of the general marketplace forces that are going on right now?
It's a great question. I wasn't around in 2001. I was in high school. In 2008, I was just coming out of grad school, so I didn't see 2008 either. This is really the first time in my professional career that I'm seeing, a potential recession, if we're not already in a recession, a bear market. The last 12 years have been this incredible run. I think the key is adaptability. And that sounds almost like, it sounds cheesy, but that really is the truth, that no matter what the market is doing, that you are adaptable. And if you have a business or you're starting a business and you have all your eggs in one basket, that's tough. So when you're starting, I think obviously you should figure out the fastest horse and hitch your wagon to that particular horse. But as quickly as you possibly can, you need to create some other ways to do so. So, in the case of a retail business or a brand on Shopify, one of the things that happened during the pandemic was March 20th or 22nd hits, 2020. All these physical retailers have to shut down because of the stay-at-home orders. Most of them did not have another option. So a lot of them ended up coming to Shopify, opening Shopify stores. And now that things are coming back and retail is sort of rebalancing between online and offline, they're still running their online store on Shopify, and they're also running their offline store. And they're now trying to cross-sell on, social media platforms, and they're doing pop-ups, but they're creating more adaptability. And that, I think, was if there was a gift from the pandemic, that was the gift. It was this reminder that I need to have flexibility and adaptability in my business, so that if, let's hope not, there's another pandemic, I have to shut my doors again, I still have this online business. I still have this other business as well. And by the way, vice versa. I think that there's a lot of online retailers that are now looking and saying, it seems like consumers want to buy in person. And so maybe I should start thinking about having, a pop-up to start, or a short-term lease to start, and then eventually having a store. And if you look at the companies that I admire most, let's look at Allbirds, for example. When you talk to Joey and Tim and you look at their business, these are the founders of Allbirds. They have physical stores. They have an online store. They just announced a big deal, I think, with Nordstrom's last week or the week before. So they're doing wholesale. They're cross-selling on Instagram. They have so much adaptability built into their business that if one sort of gets toned down, the other one can get toned up. And I think that is absolutely the key. And you can do it on a small scale as well. I mean, if you have a show on YouTube and something happens and the algorithm changes and all of a sudden you're not getting as many, views, well, now you also have TikTok and you're getting a lot of views there. And the more levers you have, that is freedom, that is oxygen, that allows you to make better decisions over the long run. And the key also is to keep some sort of an appetite of real experimentation in your business, so that when a new thing happens, a new idea comes out, a new way to get in front of consumers is brought to the forefront. I don't know where augmented reality and VR, so mixed reality and commerce is going to be in 5 years from now. But I do know that even for my little tea company, when I'm thinking about mixed reality, I'm going to try things out. Imagine before you buy a tea, you're able to put on a headset or a pair of glasses, and you're able to meet or see an incredible, the greatest tea concierge in the world and get a lesson from them. Or imagine you're able to put on, your AR glasses and you look at a bag of tea and it tells you right there, steeping time and exactly what, how much to put in, and it tells you the temperature of the water. I'm going to experiment there. Is that going to change the trajectory of Firebelly? I have no idea. It might, it probably won't, but that's okay. But the idea is to have enough levers around me that I can be adaptable.
That all makes a ton of sense. Well, thank you so much, Harley, for your time. I don't want to take up.
No, this has been so much fun. Thank you for this. I had a great time chatting with you. I hope this was valuable for your listeners. This is a really cool one for me, because I'm not just a guest on the show, but I'm also a huge fan and a huge listener and watcher of idea generation. I think what you're building is so fun.
thank you so much. We appreciate your support, and yeah, was definitely very educational. I really appreciate your perspective on a lot of these things. The irony of idea generation is, that this is my first shot really running my own business about other people running their own businesses. So I
Meta, yeah, cool.
feel like I take away something from every single one of these interviews, and I definitely appreciate your point of view and how you think about culture and all of these various challenges that entrepreneurs experience.
Thank you.